2 hours ago, something broke. Not a policy, not a negotiation, not a tariff schedule. Something structural. Something that took 80 years to build and may take a generation to repair. The White House, in the span of a single morning, managed to trigger a simultaneous rupture across 3 theaters at once: North America, the Middle East, and the global financial architecture that underpins every dollar transaction on Earth. The administration called it strategic pressure. What it actually produced was a self-inflicted collapse on 3 fronts, playing out in real time, with no exit strategy visible from Washington and no allied capital willing to offer one. This is not a trade dispute. This is not a diplomatic incident. This is the moment historians will mark as the day the post-war international order stopped bending and started breaking, and the country holding the hammer realized too late it was also standing on the glass. Let us walk through exactly what happened, why it happened, and why Washington is now staring at consequences it spent no time modeling. First rupture came from the north. The U.S.-Canada relationship, the longest peaceful border in human history, the bedrock of NATO's western flank, the foundation of North American energy security. It did not erode. It was severed deliberately, with a signature. The executive actions targeting Canadian energy flows, Canadian sovereign investment assets, and Canadian intelligence participation in Five Eyes did not register in Ottawa as negotiating pressure. They registered as a declaration. And Mark Carney, a man who has managed systemic financial crises at the institutional level for 2 decades, responded not with a phone call, but with a counter-architecture. Pipeline redirections to Pacific buyers, already contracted. Mineral export controls, already drafted. Intelligence sharing frameworks with the UK, already finalized in secret. None of it was improvised. All of it was waiting. The critical detail that Washington missed, and that every analyst is now scrambling to explain, is that Canada did not react to the crisis. Canada had already solved it, months in advance, and was simply waiting for the trigger to deploy the solution. The consequence is structural and immediate. American refineries configured for Canadian heavy crude cannot switch feedstock in weeks. The retooling timeline runs 18 to 24 months minimum, at costs running into the billions. In the interim, supply tightens, Midwest gas prices climb, and the political pain lands not in Ottawa but in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the exact states the administration cannot afford to lose. The American Petroleum Institute, the Chamber of Commerce, Marathon Petroleum, Valero, none of them are Canadian voices. They are American industry leaders warning their own president that the weapon he deployed is pointing the wrong direction. But this is where it gets considerably more serious. The second rupture did not come from the north. It came from the east. The Middle East, already operating under conditions of maximum regional volatility, has entered a phase that energy markets are now pricing as a long-duration structural disruption rather than a temporary shock. Iranian nuclear positioning, Houthi interdiction campaigns in the Red Sea corridor, and the collapse of the Abraham Accords framework as a stabilizing mechanism have combined to push regional risk premiums to levels not seen since 2008. For the United States, this would have been manageable under normal conditions. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve exists for exactly this scenario. American diplomatic leverage in the Gulf remains significant, but the administration has spent the past several months burning the credibility required to activate that leverage. You cannot simultaneously sanction your closest ally, demand loyalty from Gulf partners, and expect the room to hold together. It does not. The Gulf states are not enemies of Washington, but they are rational actors. And rational actors, watching Canadian sovereign investment assets frozen by executive order, begin asking a very specific question. If Canada, which has buried its soldiers beside American soldiers on every major battlefield for a century, can be sanctioned on political grounds, What exactly is the guarantee that protects anyone else? That question does not stay in private diplomatic channels. It moves into reserve allocation decisions. It moves into treasury bond auction behavior. It moves into the calculation of whether dollar-denominated contracts still represent the lowest risk settlement mechanism available. And this is where the third rupture begins. What happened next stunned even the most seasoned observers in global finance. The dollar did not collapse. It softened. But the direction was visible and the timing was unmistakable. Allied sovereign buyers, Japan, South Korea, Germany, the United Kingdom, pulled back from treasury auctions. Not dramatically, not in a way that triggers a crisis in a single session, but consistently, measurably, in a direction that Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley analysts are now flagging in internal notes that have a way of becoming public. The alternative settlement frameworks that Canada began assembling, clearing through London, Frankfurt, Tokyo, and Sydney without American financial institution involvement, expanded. Australia joined. India signed a memorandum. South Korea entered final negotiations. The system is not a replacement for dollar dominance. Not yet. But it is infrastructure. And infrastructure, once built, does not unbuild itself when the political weather changes. A leaked internal note from one of the largest sovereign wealth operations on Earth put the concern precisely. The administration has confused financial dominance with financial invincibility. These are not the same condition. Dominance is structural. Invincibility is assumed. The assumption is now being tested simultaneously on 3 fronts, and the results are not favorable. Inside Washington, the picture is not one of strategic recalibration. It is one of reactive improvisation. Republican senators from border states are demanding emergency briefings. American manufacturers dependent on Canadian rare earth supply are flooding congressional offices with projections they cannot afford to make public. The Pentagon is running revised assessments on Arctic surveillance coverage, following Canada's withdrawal from joint command structures and the redeployment of Canadian personnel to a new UK-Denmark-Norway Arctic framework. A former NORAD commander stated on record, "Without Canadian radar infrastructure, there are detection gaps that adversaries will exploit. The Russian Arctic flight tempo has tripled in recent months. Those flights are tracked primarily by Canadian installations. Suspending the cooperation does not punish Canada. It blinds the United States. The international response has not fragmented along expected lines. It has unified in a direction Washington did not model. The European Union moved faster than any previous response to a North American trade action. The UK signaled alignment with Canada on both the financial framework and the intelligence architecture. Japan and South Korea, America's 2 most critical Pacific allies, confirmed active negotiations for long-term Canadian energy contracts. The framing that Canada is isolated from its superpower neighbor has inverted completely. Canada is not isolated. Canada is the center of a forming coalition. The United States is watching from outside it, holding tools that are proving less effective by the hour. And at the center of all of it stands a figure Washington genuinely did not model as a threat. Mark Carney governed the Bank of Canada through the 2008 crisis. He governed the Bank of England through Brexit. He understands, at a technical level that exceeds anyone currently in the White House, how global financial plumbing works, where the pressure points are, and what happens when sovereign trust erodes faster than institutions can compensate. The administration expected a politician. What it engaged was a central banker who had already mapped every countermove before the first executive action was signed. So where does Washington go from here? The options are 3. None of them are good. Enforce the full package: energy restrictions, investment freezes, intelligence suspension, mineral export standoffs, and watch Midwest refineries begin managed shutdowns within weeks. Watch gas prices climb into ranges that produce the kind of consumer anger that destroys political coalitions. Watch the alternative financial settlement system add members every month while American allies quietly begin diversifying away from dollar-denominated exposure. Watch the Pentagon operate NORAD at reduced coverage while Russian Arctic activity continues to escalate. This option produces maximum damage, distributed unevenly, with the heaviest share landing on American consumers, American manufacturers, and American defense readiness. Quietly reverse course. Walk back the executive actions, offer Carney a call, and attempt to reconstruct the relationship as though the rupture did not happen. This option requires conceding that the strategy failed, and failed publicly, against a neighbor that responded not with fear, but with a counter-architecture that is now partly operational and cannot be dismantled simply because Washington changed its mind. Carney has stated the condition clearly. Full rescission comes before any negotiations begin. Not partial rollback. Not phased reduction. Full rescission. Which means the administration must publicly retreat before it gets to the table. Escalate further. This option produces the fastest acceleration of every negative outcome currently in motion. Every additional pressure point activated against Canada pushes more allied capitals to ask the question, if this is how Washington treats its closest partner, what exactly is the value of the American alliance guarantee? Each new measure becomes recruitment material for the alternative frameworks being assembled. The harder Washington presses, the faster the coalition around Canada grows. 2 hours ago, the White House believed it was operating from a position of overwhelming structural advantage. It believed that size equals leverage, that financial dominance equals invincibility, and that a neighbor this integrated into American supply chains, defense systems, and financial infrastructure could not afford to resist. Every one of those assumptions has been tested this morning. Every one of them has shown a crack. The rupture is not finished. It is accelerating. And the country holding the pieces is the one that dropped them.